This happened when I was 18 or 19. It was a summer night, probably late July or early August. It was warm out, so a friend and I had gotten into the habit of driving around late at night just to talk. We'd do loops outside the city, the kind of quiet, empty roads that cut through the French countryside. No real destination, just driving and talking. Windows cracked, music low. This one night, it was around 1:30 a.m., and the road was completely empty. No streetlights, no visible houses, just open fields on both sides. We were going slow, talking about something personal. Suddenly, my friend hit the brakes. He didn't yell or panic, just a sharp, reflexive stop. There in the headlights, I saw a man crossing the road. He came out of the field to our left, walking towards the one on the right. What immediately struck me was that he was completely naked. His skin was an oddly pale, flat beige, almost like a dull gray. But that's not what stuck with me. It was the way that he moved. He didn't walk like a drunk or someone who was hurt. It was more like he didn't weigh anything. His steps were slow and floaty, almost like he was forcing his body to move forward. His arms hung loose, his head tilted slightly down. He never turned towards us. No reaction to the lights, the sound, nothing. He crossed slowly and disappeared into the field on the other side. We were silent for a couple of seconds, processing, and then my friend accelerated away down the road. We drove back towards the main road, not saying much. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt this deep, uneasy feeling like what I had seen didn't make sense. The next day, out of curiosity, we went back in the afternoon. We recognized the spot easily because of a twisted tree by the roadside, but when we looked around, there was nothing. No trail, no path, no house nearby. Just two big fields and the same empty, quiet road cutting through. I have no rational explanation for what we saw, but I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't normal. A few nights ago, me and my two buddies were hanging out, as we usually do late on Friday night. We have this road near our town that leads to a military-based gate. A right turn from the gate is a road that leads through a large section of woods and eventually back into town. The whole area is surrounded by woods for at least a few miles. It's common for people to street race down this road at night, as it has all kinds of fun twists and turns and is far from anybody. My friends and I often go there to drive fast and goof around with our cars as we do it often. Anyways, we were all hanging out listening to music, driving towards the road. We made the turn to go past the abandoned church onto the short road leading to the military base gate. My friend picked up some speed going up to the gate, and we turned onto the dark wooded road, going fast, but not too fast yet, in case any cops that sometimes hang around the area were there. We made it towards the end of the road and made a quick U-turn to go back the same way we had come from. But only this time, we were going a little faster through the dark, quiet woods, carrying through the corners swiftly. We got back to the military gate, and my friend made the turn back down towards the abandoned church, picking up speed as we went down the hill. Right as we reached the bottom of the hill, we all noticed something that sounded like a stick hitting the side of the car with a hard-sounding thud. My friend hit the brakes and slowed down to about 20 miles per hour. We all started asking questions as to what just happened. Being the only one that didn't see what happened from the back driver's side seat, I thought we just hit a branch, kicking it up off the ground and making it hit the side of the car. My friends quickly reassured me that they both didn't see a branch in the road, and they both saw it come from the woods, hitting the driver's side quarter panel and window as if it was thrown at us. We all concluded that it was probably somebody that might have been walking down the road, and for some reason, we didn't see them, and they were probably angry at us for speeding by. We turned around at the end of the short road to see if that was true, and then we noticed another car coming our way. They were passing the same spot that we were at when we collided with the branch. This car very obviously slowed down when passing that spot, and then sped back up before passing us. It was a little weird. It was as if it seemed like they had experienced the same thing we had. We got all the way back up to the gate and didn't see anybody walking and didn't even see a single branch in the road either, for dents or scratches, and sure enough it had some one noticeable dent with a couple of tiny pale chips and a few good scratches. My friend's car is older, so we didn't really care. We concluded that it was just some kids messing around. This time, and we hiked it out of there. Noticeable dent with a couple of tiny pale chips and a few good scratches. My friend's car is older, so we didn't really care. We concluded that it was just some kids messing around, even though it wouldn't really make sense, being there were no cars parked anywhere on the side of the road or houses close enough to justify walking there. Also, it was 1 in the morning, so who would be out there? Even our original thought of somebody walking there was kind of a stretch of our logic. This time, my friend positioned the car to face the opening so that we would get a clear view with the headlights. Of course, whatever I saw was gone. Noises just 3 hours before, and all the food had been sealed and put away before everybody went back to their tents and trailers. While it's possible an animal went through our camp, I would like to point out a couple of things. There were no deer tracks, there were no bear tracks, and nothing had been disturbed. But there were shoe prints in the dirt near my tent, and they were not made by my flip-flops. Our camp was set up so my in-laws' trailer was in between our tents, so there was a good distance in between our tents, and the fire pit and tables were further separating us. This means whoever was in our camp literally hung out in our camp and potentially watched me pee outside. Even if somebody wanted to take a stroll around the campgrounds on a Friday at 2:30 in the morning, there would be hushed voices and flashlights, not silence, and I'm sure they would have walked on the road, considering there are stakes in the ground and ropes that you could trip over because of the canopies and tents. Anyways, my aunt had rented a cabin that is located up a little dirt road across from the campground entrance, and she had showed up around 6:30 p.m. Friday night. Apparently, when she and her kids were unloading the truck, a beat-up car made its way onto the dirt road. Her aunt said the lady in the car looked like a junkie and was asking super weird questions, like if she had seen some guy, and asked if my aunt and her kids were staying at the cabin. When she told the lady that she had rented it for the weekend, the lady looked super irritated and ended the conversation, turned around, and sped back down the dirt road. I have a feeling that either the guy that the lady was looking for, or possibly both, and a friend were making their way through the camps in the middle of the night. In all the years I've been going there, that was the first time anything like this happened. I don't know what their intentions hanging around our camp were, but I'm glad that neither me nor my sister-in-law decided to walk the camp for the outhouse in the middle of the night. Something wasn't right that night, and we very well could have been greeted by unwanted visitors. I live by this nature preserve on a dark road which has hiking, frisbee golf, and a park among other stuff. I was around 13 or 14 at the time, and it was the summertime. During the summer, my friends and I love to go on the trails at the nature preserve at night because it's quiet, creepy, and we love the adrenaline. Now, most of the trails are quite short, but one of them is 2.5 miles long, and it goes through about half of the entire nature preserve. We had been scared to go down this trail at night, but this time we finally decided to face our fears and go for it. We went down the trail, which is this gravel road, and it's quite wide, so we were all next to each other on our bikes, about 6. Now the trail is surrounded by woods completely, and there was no light. And to make it extra creepy, we decided not to use any flashlights, which was a terrible idea. So we were going down this trail, and out of nowhere we saw about 8 deer in the middle of the trail just standing still. Now for some reason, my friend has a fear of deer, and he was panicking and wanted to go back, but we didn't want to let him go by himself, but we also didn't want to leave the trail, so we kind of forced him to stay. Out of nowhere, the deer started running into the woods, as if they were startled by a potential predator. You know when you're in the woods and you hear crickets, frogs, and other animals? They all went quiet, and we were standing in complete, utter silence. We were a little freaked out, standing in the middle of the trail expecting a bear or something to pop out. We stayed in the spot for about a minute or two until all the sounds came back and everything seemed to be normal. Even after that, we still had the will to keep going down the trail. So, we kept biking, and out of nowhere, the trail got very narrow, only about 5 feet wide, and we didn't realize it. So, we all just biked straight into the woods off the trail and crashed into bushes. It took a little to recuperate, but we got into a straight line and went down the narrow trail. At this point, the trail went from gravel road to just a small, narrow dirt path. The following moments are by far the scariest moments of my life. We were going down the narrow path, and I randomly looked to my right and noticed a bit of light. We noticed that we were next to a road in the distance, meaning we were nearing the end of the trail. I was looking at this road, and I wasn't paying attention to what was in front of me. And I ran straight into the person in front of me, and it was like a domino effect. And we all fell. As we were getting back up, we began to hear the sound of wood knocking all around us. And then we heard people talking. It was like what it sounds like to be in a room full of people talking. So you can hear people talking, but you can't really make out what they're saying. The voices stopped, and we noticed a silhouette on the road in the distance. It was just standing, looking right at us. So it turned, and we took this as a sign to turn around and leave. We raced back down the way we had come from, and I'm surprised we didn't crash again. As we were riding back as fast as we could, my bike chain broke. We stopped and fixed it as fast as we could. As we were fixing it, the woods went quiet again, and I heard extremely heavy footsteps down the road behind us. We got the chain on and booked it out of there. As we exited the trail, we got back onto the road that my neighborhood is on. We heard what sounded like a woman's screech coming from the trail, and we raced home and never went back to that trail again. I always hated going camping. My parents had sent me to summer camp every year in Colorado, which involved at least one camping trip into the woods. When I turned 16 and became a camp counselor in training, however, my distaste for the whole experience briefly changed. At that age, we were only a few years older than the oldest campers, but we were given considerable leeway in what we were allowed to do. Most nights, we would have to stay in the cabin with our campers. But it was rumored that the camping trip was a time where the counselors in training would get drunk, smoke weed, and hook up with each other after everyone else went to sleep. What I didn't know, however, was that the events of that camping trip would dissuade me from ever going camping in the woods again. Altogether, there were around 30 people on the trip. There were 4 counselors in training, 4 counselors, and around 20 or so boys and girls between the ages of 13 and 14. We were walking in a single file line down the various trails, and you could hardly hear any sounds of nature over the conversations and laughter of the campers. Several hours went by, and we made our way through a dense marshy area and up a steep incline populated with evergreens and aspens. I wasn't the most athletic kid, so it was around this point that I found myself at the back of the line with one of the other counselors in training, Jordan, as well as 2 campers who were also struggling to keep up. The 4 of us started chatting, and in our distracted state, we began to fall more behind the rest of the campers until the last of them faded out of view around a bend about 50 feet up the way. Unconcerned, we kept walking at the same slow pace. But after 30 minutes or so, the trail started to level off, and I began to feel increasingly anxious. Not only had the rest of the group disappeared ahead of us, but we had entered a stretch of completely dead evergreen, half of which looked scorched by a wildfire, and the other half appeared to have been killed by a disease. The eeriness of the landscape was punctuated by a small cabin sitting in the middle of the scorched forest, but seemingly untouched by the fire that must have spread through the area. We were a little bit spooked by the scene, and one of the campers screamed when a twig broke behind us. Jordan and I started laughing a bit, but we quickly stopped when we turned and looked at where the sound had come from. Not 20 feet behind us was a haggard looking man with a messy nest of black hair and a long black beard, slowly making his way up the trail with eyes locked on us. He didn't appear to have any hiking supplies on him, and we had no idea how long he had been walking behind us. Being young, We were naturally pretty freaked out, but Jordan managed to give the guy a slight wave before saying to the rest of us that we should catch up with the group. As we turned to continue our way up the path, the man mumbled a question that was hard to hear, and I was shocked when Jordan turned around to ask the man to repeat himself. The man muttered again slightly louder, "Going camping?" Jordan answered the man that yes, we were going camping. The man smiled slightly before stating in a creepy and ominous voice, "Better be careful." We nodded and gave a half-hearted thank you before continuing to try to find the rest of the group, this time with a much faster pace. Although the man had been walking up the same trail as us when we saw him, he didn't continue, but instead just stood there in the middle of the trail. He watched us as we made our way up the winding path and disappeared from his view. Finally, we managed to catch up with the rest of the group who had been waiting for us, and we told the adult counselors about our interaction with the man. They just shrugged it off, telling us that the guy probably lived in that cabin and just wanted to know what we were doing near his property. Still, I felt unnerved by the encounter, and when we finally arrived at the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man had somehow followed us. Eventually, though, I put it out of my mind and managed to enjoy myself a bit. Everyone else had gone to bed, and Jordan and the other counselor in training from the boys' cabin had brought alcohol they had stolen from the counselor's quarters. I took out a joint I had stashed away for this exact occasion. To avoid getting in trouble, we decided to hike out into the woods a bit to smoke the joint, and we made our way to the edge of the river where we had washed our pots and pans earlier in the day. The spot was eerily silent, and the thought of the man from earlier kept popping into my head. Assuming that I was cold, not anxious, Jordan gave me his blue hoodie, and this prompted one of the other girls to suggest that we switch tents for the night. This was so that I could sleep in the same tent with him, and she could sleep in the same tent as the other boy. I had absolutely no problem with this, and after smoking the joint, we made our way back to our tents, which were pitched slightly away from the others, and we discreetly sipped on the alcohol while telling scary camping stories. Some time passed, and one of the boys was in the middle of telling a rather muddled story that he was clearly making up on the spot when he suddenly stopped. In the silence, we could hear what sounded like footsteps crunching pine needles about 40 feet away near one of the other campers' tents. As we strained to listen to what was going on, the noises stopped, and we assumed that it was just one of the campers getting up to go to the bathroom. Even so, being stoned and hopped up from the scary stories, we decided to call it a night and go hide in our tents. Jordan followed suit, and we awkwardly made out before eventually going to sleep. I don't know what time it was, but it must have been quite late when I suddenly woke up to the distinct sounds of footsteps walking around near my tent. Shot with adrenaline, I tried to lay as still as possible and quiet my breathing. From the sound, it was apparent that somebody was less than 3 feet away from the front of my tent, seemingly pacing back and forth. I turned to wake up Jordan, but I was immediately put at ease when I saw that he wasn't next to me. Assuming Jordan was the one I had been hearing, I closed my eyes and I was just beginning to drift back to sleep when I heard the tent unzip. I felt Jordan lie down next to me, and after a few moments, he put his arms around me and began to spoon me. After nearly drifting off to sleep again, I realized that I had to go to the bathroom, and I muttered something about having to go pee before beginning to unzip my sleeping bag. Seemingly annoyed by the noise, Jordan lazily turned over, pulling his hoodie over his head before going still again. Quietly, so as not to wake him up, I unzipped the tent and quickly scanned the campsite for any movement. I put my shoes on and began making the trek across our campsite to the designated pee zone. I had just made it to the area when I heard rustling coming from the campsite as if somebody was rummaging through our supplies and bags. Still slightly drunk in my haste, lost my balance, and tried to catch myself with a branch that made a loud snapping noise when I grabbed it. I tried to gather myself as quietly as I could, but when I finally managed to look up, I could see that there was a figure making its way across our campsite in my direction. Before I could even think, I was blinded by the bright light of a flashlight shining directly onto my eyes, and the light was getting bigger. So whoever it was, they were coming towards me. The figure got 10 feet away from me before I heard Jordan's voice say, "Sorry, it's just me." I breathed a sigh of relief, but then Jordan asked me something that really confused me. He asked if I had seen his blue hoodie. He knew that I gave it back to him, but he thought one of the campers might have stolen it from his bag while we were sleeping. After a brief pause, I managed to stutter out, "But you were just wearing it when you got back in the tent." What he said next made my blood run cold. He said, "What are you talking about? It's been missing since we got back from the river." Jordan even went down there to see if he had left it by accident, but after he couldn't find it, he thought he would check the boys' bags, and that's when he saw me. My confusion quickly turned to sheer terror as I realized that the man who got into the tent with me just moments prior hadn't been Jordan. Sensing that something was wrong, Jordan asked me what happened, and I managed to get out that whoever stole his hoodie was sleeping in our tent. Not believing me, Jordan insisted on walking back to the tent to check it out. As slowly and quietly as possible, we made our way to the side of the tent. And when Jordan flipped on his flashlight and shined it through the nylon lining, he let out a scream. We could both see the clear outline of a man's shadow lying still inside our tent. What happened next is a bit of a blur, but we ran to the pod of tents on the other side of the campground where the older counselors were sleeping. We frantically unzipped their tent and started yelling for them to come out, and there was a man in our tent. I remember panic setting in as our counselors slowly and groggy woke up. But after a bit more of frantic yelling, they finally managed to understand the severity of the situation when a commotion broke out on the other side of the camp near our tent. By this time, they ran to the scene. However, they only found an unzipped tent and a bunch of our things littered on the ground that the man had apparently knocked over or thrown during his escape. After that, we heard our counselors radioing back to the camp to call the police, and we could tell that they were as scared as we were. I don't think any of us slept after that. Luckily, we only had to wait a few hours for the sun to come up, and by that time, a few of the other counselors had arrived with guns to escort us back to camp. On our way back down, one of the campers found Jordan's jacket tied around one of the trees on the path. To this day, I can't say for certain that the man in the tent was the same guy who we ran into earlier on the trail, but his face and that